The autumn sun hung high over Lincoln Park, casting long shadows across the freshly mowed grass where families had gathered for the annual Community Safety Day. Officer Marcus Chen wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the crowd of nearly 200 people, parents holding smartphones aloft, children bouncing on their toes with anticipation, and elderly couples sitting on folding chairs under the shade of oak trees. This was his favorite part of the job, the moments when he could show the community that police work wasn't just about enforcing laws, but about building trust, one interaction at a time. "All right, everyone," Marcus's voice boomed across the park, amplified by the portable speaker system the department had set up. "Are you ready to see what a real police K9 can do?" A chorus of excited shouts erupted from the children, their voices blending into a wave of pure enthusiasm. Beside Marcus, Atlas sat at perfect attention, his dark eyes focused, his muscular body coiled with restrained energy. The 3-year-old German Shepherd was a magnificent specimen, 75 pounds of muscle, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. His black and tan coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his pointed ears swiveled at every sound, constantly assessing his environment. "Atlas here has been my partner for 18 months, Marcus continued, walking along the orange safety cones that marked the demonstration area. "He's trained in suspect apprehension, narcotics detection, and search and rescue. But most importantly, he's trained to protect the community. Let's start with some basic obedience." Marcus ran through a series of commands: sit, stay, down, heel, and Atlas executed each one with precision that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. A young boy, maybe 7 years old, shouted, "Can he do tricks?" Marcus grinned. "Police dogs don't do tricks, buddy. They complete missions. But I'll show you something cool." He set up an obstacle course, a tunnel made of fabric, 3 jumps of varying heights, and a series of weave poles. With a single command, Atlas exploded into motion. His powerful legs propelled him over the first jump with inches to spare. He dove through the tunnel, emerging on the other side without breaking stride. The crowd gasped as he cleared the second jump, higher than the first, his body stretching in midair like a panther. Children screamed with delight as Atlas navigated the weave poles with balletic grace, his body undulating between each pole. Marcus couldn't help but smile at the reaction. This was why he'd become a K9 officer, to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. He glanced across the crowd, making eye contact with smiling faces, when something unusual caught his attention. At the far edge of the gathering, standing slightly apart from the other families, was a young woman in her early 30s. She had chestnut brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. But it wasn't the woman who had snagged Marcus's focus. It was the little girl clutching her hand. The child couldn't have been more than 3 years old, with blonde ringlets that bounced around her cherubic face and bright blue eyes that seemed far too serious for someone so young. While every other child in the park was jumping, laughing, or tugging at their parents' sleeves, this little girl stood absolutely still. Her small fingers were wrapped so tightly around her mother's hand that Marcus could see the white of her knuckles even from 30 feet away. What struck him most was her expression. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't excited. Instead, her gaze was locked on Atlas with an intensity that seemed to bore right through the dog. Her mouth hung slightly open, and even from a distance, Marcus could see that her entire body was trembling. "Now," Marcus announced, pulling his attention back to the demonstration, "let's show you how Atlas helps us keep you safe. Who wants to volunteer?" A dozen hands shot into the air, mostly belonging to brave teenagers eager to impress their friends. Marcus selected a stocky 16-year-old boy wearing a football jersey. He helped the volunteer into a protective bite sleeve and explained the scenario. The volunteer would pretend to be a suspect running from police. "On my command, run toward those trees," Marcus instructed, pointing to the far end of the park. "Atlas will pursue and apprehend. Don't worry, the sleeve will protect you." The teenager nodded nervously, adrenaline clear in his eyes. Marcus gave the signal and the boy took off running. "Atlas fast," Marcus commanded sharply, using the German word for attack. The transformation in Atlas was instantaneous. The friendly, obedient dog became a missile of focused aggression. His legs churned across the grass, closing the distance to the running volunteer in seconds. The crowd erupted in cheers as Atlas launched himself through the air, his jaws clamping down on the protective sleeve with bone-rattling force. The teenager went down, gently, because Atlas was trained to control his takedowns during demonstrations, and the dog maintained his grip until Marcus gave the release command. The park exploded in applause. Parents clapped, children jumped up and down, and the teenager walked back wearing the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen, completely unharmed but thrilled by the experience. Marcus took a moment to let Atlas drink from his water bowl, then opened the floor to questions. Hands shot up immediately. "How old is Atlas?" 3 years old. "Does he live with you?" "Yes, he's both my partner and my family member." "What does he eat?" "High-protein kibble and way too many training treats." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus answered a few more questions, keeping one eye on the strange little girl who still hadn't moved, hadn't smiled, hadn't broken her laser focus on Atlas. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. The little girl suddenly tore her hand free from her mother's grasp with surprising strength. Before the woman could react, the child was running, not the clumsy toddle of a 3-year-old, but a desperate sprint that spoke of urgent purpose. "Emma, no!" The woman's voice cut through the crowd, sharp with panic. The little girl dodged between adults like a tiny running back navigating defenders. Parents jumped aside, surprised shouts filling the air. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the child and Atlas, unsure of her intent. Was she scared, excited, about to do something dangerous? But the girl, Emma, her mother had called her, didn't slow down. She ran straight toward Atlas, her small sneakers pounding against the grass, her blonde curls streaming behind her. The crowd gasped collectively, parents pulling their own children back, creating a widening circle around the scene. Marcus raised his hand, ready to give Atlas a command if needed, but the dog had already sensed something. His ears were forward, his body language curious rather than defensive. Emma skidded to a halt just inches from Atlas, close enough that Marcus could have reached out and grabbed her. Her chest heaved with exertion and emotion. She raised one trembling finger and pointed it directly at the German Shepherd. The entire park fell silent. 200 people held their breath. "Stop!" Emma's voice rang out, high and clear, and filled with an emotion far too complex for a 3-year-old. "I need to tell him something important." Marcus froze, his heart pounding. The mother, pale as a ghost, was pushing through the crowd, apologizing frantically. But Marcus couldn't move. He was transfixed by the expression on this child's face. It was recognition. Pure, undeniable recognition. And that's when everything changed. Marcus Chen had been a police officer for 9 years and a K-9 handler for 3. He'd faced armed suspects, navigated high-speed chases, and once talked down a man threatening to jump from a bridge. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the sight of a 3-year-old girl staring at his dog with tears streaming down her face and a look of desperate recognition in her eyes. "Ma'am, please," Marcus said gently, raising his hand as Emma's mother broke through the crowd, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. "It's okay, just, let's see what's happening here." The woman stopped, her breath coming in short gasps. "I'm so sorry, officer. Emma, honey, you can't just run off like that. Come here right now." But Emma didn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, her finger still pointed at Atlas, her small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. The German Shepherd, displaying the impeccable training that made him one of the department's top K-9s, remained perfectly still. His dark eyes moved between Marcus and the child, waiting for direction, but his body language showed curiosity rather than concern. "Emma Mitchell, I mean it," the mother said, her voice taking on that edge parents use when they're trying to maintain authority while dying of embarrassment. "We need to go. Now." "No," Emma's voice cracked with an emotion so raw that several people in the crowd gasped. She took another step closer to Atlas, close enough now that her blonde curls nearly touched his nose. "Mommy, you don't understand, it's him. It's really him." Marcus knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the child's eye level. Years of community policing had taught him that children responded better when adults made themselves less intimidating. "Hey there, Emma. That's a pretty name. I'm Officer Marcus and this is Atlas. What did you want to tell him?" Emma's blue eyes, swimming with tears that seemed far too profound for someone so young, shifted from the dog to Marcus's face. Her lower lip quivered. "He's my daddy's dog," she whispered, and the words came out like a confession, like a secret she'd been holding inside for so long that finally speaking it aloud physically hurt. The crowd, which had been murmuring with curiosity and concern, fell into an absolute silence. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm autumn sun. "Sweetheart, no," the mother said, and Marcus heard the break in her voice before he saw the tears beginning to form in her eyes. "That's not Daddy's dog. Daddy's dog is. He's not here anymore." But Emma shook her head fiercely, her curls bouncing. "Yes, he is. I remember, Mommy." She turned back to Atlas, and before Marcus could stop her, she reached out with both small hands and placed them on either side of the dog's face. Marcus's breath caught. This was the moment when everything could go wrong. Atlas was trained, yes, but he was still a powerful animal, and unexpected touches, especially to the face, could trigger defensive reactions. His hand moved instinctively to his command position. But Atlas did something that would replay in Marcus's mind for years to come. The German shepherd leaned into the child's touch. His tail, which had been still, began a slow, gentle wag. He shifted his weight forward slightly and pressed his nose against Emma's chest, just over her heart, and inhaled deeply. Then he looked up at Marcus with an expression the officer had never seen before, something that looked almost like recognition, like understanding. "Oh my God," someone in the crowd whispered. Emma wrapped her small arms around Atlas's thick neck and buried her face in his fur. Her voice, muffled but clear enough for those nearby to hear, came out in broken sobs. "Daddy said his dog was brave and strong. He said his dog would always protect people. He said his dog had a big heart and loved to work and would never let bad guys win." Sarah Mitchell, the officer would learn her name was Sarah, put a hand over her mouth, her body swaying as if she might collapse. An elderly woman standing nearby reached out to steady her, offering a supportive arm. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently, his cop instincts telling him there was a much deeper story here. "Maybe we should talk somewhere more private. There's a picnic area just over there, some shade and benches." Sarah nodded mutely, unable to speak. The crowd began to part, creating a path, and Marcus noticed that many people were wiping their eyes. Whatever was happening here, they could all sense it was something profound, something sacred. Emma refused to let go of Atlas, so Marcus made a quick decision. "Atlas, heel," he commanded softly. The dog rose to his feet with the little girl still clinging to him, and together they walked toward the picnic area. An unusual procession of officer, K9, sobbing child and devastated mother. Once they were seated at a weathered picnic table, away from the majority of the crowd though still visible to curious onlookers keeping a respectful distance, Marcus tried again. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I need to understand what's happening. Emma seems to think she knows Atlas." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Her father, my husband, Detective James Mitchell, he was killed in the line of duty 8 months ago." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard of fallen officers, attended memorials, but this was something else entirely. He was a K-9 officer, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger even as fresh tears flowed. Riverside County Sheriff's Department. His partner was a German shepherd named Ranger. They'd been together for 5 years when she couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus felt his throat constrict. Emma had been 2.5 when her father died, barely more than a baby. The cognitive development specialists always said that children that young rarely retained concrete memories from before age 3. She shouldn't remember, Sarah said, echoing his thoughts. The grief counselor told me that traumatic memory loss is common at her age. She barely talked about James after the funeral. I thought maybe it was a mercy that she was too young to really understand, to really remember. Emma, still pressed against Atlas's side, looked up at her mother with an expression of pure determination. But I do remember, Mommy. I remember Daddy's voice when he talked about his dog. I remember the dog was big and had pointy ears and a black face. I remember Daddy said his dog was his best friend besides you. Marcus swallowed hard. He looked down at Atlas, who had settled into a sphinx position next to the little girl, as calm and gentle as Marcus had ever seen him. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something that might explain, or maybe make this even more impossible to believe. Sarah looked up, her red-rimmed eyes meeting his. Atlas came from a specialized K-9 breeding program, Marcus said slowly, in Riverside County. The color drained completely from Sarah's face. The program your husband, the program Detective Mitchell's K-9 unit ran. World seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah Mitchell's hand gripped the edge of the picnic table so hard that her knuckles turned white, her wedding ring, which she still wore, catching the sunlight and throwing small prisms across the weathered wood. Marcus watched as she processed his words, saw the moment when impossible coincidence began to reshape itself into something that might be fate, or destiny, or simply the universe's way of providing comfort where comfort seemed impossible. Riverside County, Sarah repeated, her voice hollow. Your dog is from Riverside County. Yes, ma'am, Marcus confirmed, his own heart hammering against his ribs. Atlas was born in their breeding facility 3 years ago. The program specializes in producing elite working dogs for law enforcement agencies across Southern California. I got Atlas when he was 8 weeks old. A strangled sound escaped Sarah's throat, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, but something caught between disbelief and devastation. James lived and breathed that program, she whispered. He was so proud of it. He used to come home and tell me about the litters, about which puppies showed the most promise, which ones had the drive and intelligence to become great police dogs. Her voice cracked. He said those dogs would protect families, save lives, make a difference long after. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Long after he was gone, the unspoken words hung in the autumn air like ghosts. Emma, still pressed against Atlas's warm body, looked up at her mother with eyes far too knowing for a 3-year-old. Daddy's dog was named Ranger, she said matter-of-factly, as if she were reciting a lesson she'd memorized. He was black and brown, and he had a white spot right here. She touched Atlas's chest, where indeed there was a small patch of white fur barely visible beneath his dark coat. Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A lot of German shepherds have white patches, he said carefully, but even as he spoke, he was pulling out his phone, his fingers moving with urgent purpose. The small crowd that had followed them at a respectful distance had grown larger. Word was spreading through the park. Something extraordinary was happening at the K-9 demonstration, something that had nothing to do with obstacle courses or bite training. People stood in clusters, watching, whispering, many with their hands clasped over their hearts. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus said, his voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. What was Ranger's role in the breeding program? Sarah wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. He was one of their foundation studs. James said Ranger had the perfect combination of drive, intelligence, and temperament. They used him to produce. Oh God. Her hand flew to her mouth. They used him to produce the next generation of K9s before he went into active patrol duty. Marcus's phone screen glowed in his hands as he pulled up his file on Atlas. The file every K9 handler maintained with their dog's complete history, medical records, training certifications, and lineage. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. Atlas's registration number is RCK920222047, Marcus read aloud, his voice barely steady. Born May 15, 2022 at the Riverside County Sheriff's K9 breeding facility. He scrolled down, his breath catching as he reached the section he needed. Sire, Ranger von Richthofen, badge K917. Damn, Heidi von Bergwald. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Sarah's face had gone from pale to completely ashen, and for a moment Marcus thought she might faint. An older man in the crowd, a veteran by the look of his VFW cap, removed his hat and held it over his heart. Ranger, Sarah breathed. Atlas's father is Ranger. Emma's head snapped up, her blue eyes suddenly blazing with vindication and joy and grief all mixed together in an expression no child should have to wear. I told you, she said, her voice rising with triumph. I told you it was Daddy's dog. He's Ranger's baby. That's why I knew him. That's why he feels like Daddy. And then the dam broke. Emma dissolved into sobs, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of being believed, of finally having the adults understand what she'd known in her bones from the moment she'd seen Atlas. Sarah pulled her daughter into her lap, both of them crying, holding each other as 3-year-olds and mothers do when the world breaks and heals simultaneously. Marcus sat frozen, staring at his phone screen, rereading the information he'd looked at dozens of times before but never truly seen. Atlas's father was Ranger, the same Ranger who had served with Detective James Mitchell, the same Ranger who had been there when. How did Detective Mitchell die? Marcus asked gently, though part of him didn't want to know, didn't want to add that weight to this already impossibly heavy moment. Sarah took a shuddering breath, stroking Emma's hair as she spoke. They were responding to a domestic violence call. The suspect had a history, was known to be dangerous. James and Ranger went in first. That was their job, to clear the scene and make it safe. Her voice became mechanical, as if she'd told this story so many times it had worn smooth like a river stone. The suspect had a gun. He opened fire. James pushed his partner out of the way. Took the bullets that would have killed Officer Stevens. He died protecting his team. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Several officers who had wandered over from other demonstration areas stood at attention, recognition and respect in their eyes. And Ranger, Marcus asked quietly. He subdued the suspect, Sarah said, and for the first time there was a note of fierce pride in her voice. Even though he just watched his partner fall, even though he was trained to protect James above all else, Ranger followed his training, took down the shooter and held him until backup arrived. Then he went back to James and wouldn't leave his side. They said Ranger laid down next to him and stayed there until the coroner came. Emma lifted her tear-stained face from her mother's shoulder. Is Ranger okay? She asked, and the question was so pure, so full of genuine concern, that Marcus had to clear his throat several times before he could answer. I don't know, sweetheart, he admitted, but I'm going to find out. He was already composing a text to his supervisor, his fellow K9 handlers, anyone who might have connections to Riverside County, because this wasn't coincidence anymore. This was a little girl who had somehow recognized her father's legacy in his dog's son. This was a family that deserved answers, deserved closure, deserved to know that the work James Mitchell had done, the dogs he'd helped bring into the world, was still out there protecting people. This was, Marcus realized as he watched Emma rest her head against Atlas's neck, while the dog sat perfectly still, something miraculous. Marcus's phone buzzed with incoming messages before he'd even finished typing his inquiry. Word traveled fast in the law enforcement community, especially when it involved fallen officers and their K-9 partners. Within minutes, his screen was flooded with responses from contacts across 3 counties, but it was a text from Sergeant Linda Hayes in Riverside County that made his heart skip a beat. Ranger is alive and well, retired, living with Officer Pete Dawson. I'll send his contact info. This is incredible, Marcus. James Mitchell was one of our best. Marcus looked up from his phone to find that the crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, all maintaining a respectful distance but clearly invested in what was unfolding. News vans were pulling into the parking lot. Somehow the media had gotten wind of the story. He needed to act fast to protect this family's privacy while also honoring what was happening. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said softly, "Ranger is alive. He's retired and living with one of your husband's former colleagues." Sarah's head jerked up so fast that Emma nearly tumbled from her lap. "What? Ranger is alive, but I thought, after James died, they said Ranger was too traumatized to work, that he'd been retired immediately. I tried to find out where he went, but everything happened so fast and I was drowning and Emma was having nightmares and I just..." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "I failed them both. I should have found Ranger. I should have made sure we stayed connected to him." "Mom, don't cry," Emma said, her small hands patting her mother's face with the kind of tender concern that broke every heart within earshot. "You didn't fail. You were sad. Daddy wouldn't be mad." Marcus had to look away, blinking hard against the sting in his own eyes. Atlas, sensing the emotional turbulence, shifted closer to Emma and rested his head on her lap, a gesture of comfort that the dog had never displayed during any of his training scenarios. An elderly woman from the crowd stepped forward, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight. She carried a small cooler bag. "Officer, I'm Dorothy Richardson. I'm a retired pediatric nurse. That little girl has been through something profound, and these folks need some space and maybe some water." She set the bag down and pulled out bottles of cold water, offering them to Sarah and Marcus. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, accepting the bottle with shaking hands. Dorothy knelt beside Emma, her movements slow and gentle. "Sweetheart, you're very brave and very smart. You knew something the grown-ups didn't know, didn't you?" Emma nodded solemnly, taking a sip of water. "Grown-ups forget things sometimes, but I remembered Daddy's voice. He used to let me touch Ranger's fur before bedtime. He said it was magic fur that kept bad dreams away." She looked at Atlas with wonder. "Does your dog have magic fur too?" Marcus smiled despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I think all police dogs have a little bit of magic in them, Emma, and Atlas definitely got some of that magic from his dad." His phone buzzed again. This time it was a phone number with a Riverside County area code and a message. "This is Pete Dawson. Linda Hayes just called me. Is it true? Is that really James Mitchell's daughter?" Marcus excused himself and stepped a few feet away, pressing the phone to his ear as he dialed the number. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Dawson. Officer Dawson, this is Officer Marcus Chen with Lincoln County K-9 Unit. I have Atlas, and I'm here with Sarah and Emma Mitchell." There was a long pause and Marcus heard a sharp intake of breath. "James is Sarah, James is Emma." The tough officer's voice cracked on the names. "Yes, sir, and there's something you need to know. Atlas is Ranger's son." The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Jesus Christ, of course he is. Of course he is. James always said those dogs would be his legacy. He used to talk about the puppies like they were his kids too." There was rustling on the other end and Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of a dog's collar jingling. Ranger just perked up. "I swear to God, it's like he knows we're talking about James." "Officer Dawson." "Pete, call me Pete." "Pete." Emma recognized Atlas. She's 3 years old and she somehow knew. She said he was her daddy's dog. Silence. Then, quietly, kids know things, especially about the people they love. James used to bring Emma to the station when she was just a baby. Ranger would lie down next to her carrier and wouldn't move until James picked her up. That dog loved that little girl almost as much as he loved James. Marcus glanced back at the picnic table where Emma was now showing Atlas her shoelaces, explaining very seriously that they were pink because pink was a very strong color. Atlas listened with the patience of a saint, his tail swishing slowly back and forth. Pete, Sarah thought Ranger was gone. She didn't know where he ended up after James died. "I should have reached out," Pete said, his voice heavy with regret. "I took Ranger home the day after the funeral. He was a mess, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, kept searching the house for James. I was James's training partner, his best friend. I wanted to tell Sarah I had him, but I didn't know how to face her. How do you look a widow in the eye and tell her you have the only living thing that might understand her pain as much as she does?" Marcus understood. Grief made people do strange things, made them avoid the very connections that might heal them. She needs to see Ranger. Emma needs to see him. This little girl has been carrying memories that everyone told her weren't real, and she needs to know she was right. When? Pete's response was immediate. "As soon as possible." "Tomorrow, bring them tomorrow. I'm off duty. Ranger's off duty forever." Pete paused. "Marcus, there's something else you should know. Ranger still sleeps next to a photo of James, every single night. He's never stopped waiting for his partner to come home." The words hit Marcus like a freight train. He looked at Atlas, at Emma, at Sarah, and understood that what was happening here was bigger than any of them had realized. This wasn't just about a little girl recognizing a dog. This was about unfinished business, about bonds that transcended death, about love that survived even the darkest losses. "Tomorrow," Marcus confirmed. "I'll bring them to you tomorrow." When he returned to the picnic table, he found Emma sitting cross-legged on the ground with Atlas lying beside her, his head resting on her lap. She was singing softly, a lullaby Marcus realized, one that her father had probably sung to her. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said gently, kneeling down beside them, "how would you feel about taking a drive tomorrow? There's someone who's been waiting a very long time to see you both." Sarah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Ranger." "Ranger." Emma's head whipped around so fast her curls flew out like a golden halo. "We're going to see Daddy's real dog, the one who knew Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face again. "We're going to see Ranger." Emma threw her arms around Atlas's neck one more time, squeezing tight. "Did you hear that?" she whispered into his fur. "I'm going to meet your daddy, and he knew my daddy. They were best friends." Atlas, who had remained calm through the entire extraordinary afternoon, lifted his head and let out a single, soft bark, almost like an acknowledgement, almost like he understood. And maybe, Marcus thought as he watched the three of them together, maybe he did. The drive to Pete Dawson's house took 47 minutes, but to Sarah Mitchell, it felt like both an eternity and no time at all. She'd barely slept the night before, lying awake in the darkness of her bedroom, staring at the wedding photo on her nightstand and wondering what James would say about tomorrow. Would he be happy that Emma was finally going to see Ranger? Would he understand why Sarah had failed to find the dog after he died, too consumed by her own grief to think about the partner who had shared her husband's final moments? Emma, strapped into her car seat in the back, had talked non-stop since the moment she woke up. "Is Ranger big like Atlas? Does he still remember Daddy? Will he like me? What if he's sad? Can we bring him treats?" The questions tumbled out in an endless stream, punctuated by giggles and the kind of manic energy that only excited 3-year-olds possess. Marcus drove his personal vehicle, a sensible sedan rather than his patrol car, with Atlas safely secured in a custom K9 carrier in the cargo area. He'd offered to drive them, sensing that Sarah might not be in the right emotional state to navigate unfamiliar roads. She'd accepted gratefully, her hands trembling too much to grip a steering wheel. "We're about 5 minutes out," Marcus said gently, glancing at Sarah in the passenger seat. "You doing okay?" Sarah nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged. "I don't know what I am. Terrified, hopeful. It's been 8 months and I still wake up some mornings and forget that he's gone. I reach for him in bed and there's just empty space." She pressed her hand against the window, watching suburban houses blur past. What if seeing Ranger makes it worse? What if it breaks Emma's heart all over again? Or, Marcus said quietly, what if it helps her heal? Before Sarah could respond, Emma's voice rang out from the backseat. "Mommy, look, that house has a flag like Daddy's flag." Sarah turned to see a house with an American flag and a thin blue line flag hanging side by side on the porch. Her throat tightened. "Yes, baby, just like Daddy's." Marcus turned onto a tree-lined street where modest ranch-style homes sat on generous lots. He pulled into the driveway of a cream-colored house with dark green shutters and a meticulously maintained lawn. Before the car even came to a complete stop, the front door opened. Pete Dawson stepped onto the porch, and Sarah's breath caught. She recognized him from the funeral, a tall, barrel-chested man with silver hair and kind eyes that had been red with grief that terrible day. He wore jeans and a faded Riverside County Sheriff's Department t-shirt, and his face was already wet with tears. But it was the dog beside him that made Emma scream with pure joy. Ranger stood at perfect attention next to Pete, and even from the driveway, Sarah could see the gray that had crept into his muzzle over the past 8 months. He was slightly smaller than Atlas, his black and tan coat less glossy than his son's, but his eyes, those intelligent, soulful brown eyes, were fixed on their car with an intensity that made Sarah's heart hammer. "That's him," Emma shrieked, struggling against her car seat straps. "Mommy, that's Daddy's dog, I remember his face." Marcus parked and quickly moved to help Emma out of her seat while Sarah sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Through the windshield, she watched as Pete knelt down and said something to Ranger, his hand resting on the dog's head. Then Pete looked toward the car and nodded. Ranger's entire body went rigid. His ears shot forward, his nose lifted, scenting the air, and even from inside the car, Sarah saw the moment when recognition hit. The old dog's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster, his whole body beginning to quiver with excitement or emotion or something that transcended what humans typically attributed to animals. Emma was out of the car now, Marcus holding her hand to keep her from running. "Can I go to him? Can I? Pete called out, his voice thick with emotion. "Let her come. Ranger won't hurt her. He'd die before he hurt that little girl." Marcus released Emma's hand, and the 3-year-old took off running across the lawn, her pink sneakers flashing in the morning sunlight, her blonde curls bouncing wildly. Sarah finally unfroze, stumbling out of the car, her legs weak beneath her. "Ranger," Emma called out, her voice carrying all the love and recognition and grief and joy that a child who'd lost her father could hold. "Ranger, it's me. It's Emma. I'm Daddy's Emma." And then something happened that would be replayed on news channels across the country within hours, that would be shared millions of times on social media, that would make hardened police officers weep openly. Ranger broke position. The disciplined police dog who had been trained to stay, to wait, to follow commands above all else, pulled away from Pete and ran to meet Emma halfway. The old dog, who had been retired due to trauma and grief, moved with a speed and purpose that defied his 8 years and broken heart. They collided in the middle of the lawn, tiny girl and massive dog, and Ranger did something he'd never done before, something that made Pete gasp aloud. The retired K9 dropped to his belly, rolled onto his back in a position of complete submission and trust, and let Emma throw her small body across his chest. "I missed you," Emma sobbed into Ranger's fur. "Daddy's not here anymore, but I'm here. I'm still here and I remember you." Ranger twisted his head, his nose pressing against Emma's neck, inhaling deeply. He was scenting her, Sarah realized, scenting James in her DNA, in her skin, in the genetic blueprint that made her half her father. A low whine emerged from Ranger's throat, not pain, but recognition, grief, and something that sounded heartbreakingly like relief. Sarah's knees gave out and Marcus caught her, lowering her gently to the grass. She crawled toward her daughter and the dog, tears blurring her vision. "Ranger," she whispered. "Oh God, Ranger, I'm so sorry. I should have found you. I should have brought you home." The dog's head turned toward her voice, and their eyes met. In that moment, Sarah saw what Pete had told Marcus. Ranger had been waiting, had been grieving, had been lost without his partner just as she had been lost without her husband. Pete was beside them now, kneeling in the grass, his hand on Ranger's side. "He knows," Pete said, his voice breaking. "Look at him, he knows she's James's girl." Ranger shifted carefully, mindful of Emma's weight, and extended his neck to press his nose against Sarah's hand. Then he did something that made everyone present stop breathing. He lifted one paw and placed it on Sarah's arm, the same gesture James had trained him to do when offering comfort to victims and witnesses. Emma sat up, still perched on Ranger's chest, and looked at the adults with the wisdom of someone far older than her 3 years. "See," she said simply, "I told you I remembered. Dogs don't forget, and I'm my daddy's daughter. I don't forget either." Atlas, who Marcus had released from the car, approached slowly. The young dog and his father touched noses, and Ranger's tail wagged harder. Emma wrapped one arm around Ranger and reached out the other toward Atlas. "Your daddy is the best dog," she told Atlas seriously. "He loved my daddy so much. They were heroes together." And there in Pete Dawson's front yard, under the morning sun, 2 widows and an orphan child found the missing piece they hadn't known they needed. A dog who remembered, who grieved, who proved that love didn't end when life did. By noon, Emma's story had gone viral. Someone in the crowd at the park had filmed the initial encounter between Emma and Atlas, and the video, showing a 3-year-old running toward a police dog while crying, "That's Daddy's dog," had been shared over 50,000 times. News outlets from Sacramento to San Diego were calling Pete's house, Marcus's station, and even the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Pete had turned off his phone after the 7th call from a local television station. "This isn't about ratings," he growled, watching through his living room window as Emma and Ranger played in the backyard. The old dog was lying on his side while Emma gently brushed his fur with a soft brush Pete had retrieved from the garage. Atlas supervised nearby, his head tilted as if he were watching his father teach him how to be gentle with children. "This is about that little girl and her mama getting closure." But Sarah, sitting on Pete's worn leather couch with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, surprised them both. "Maybe we shouldn't hide from it," she said softly. "James always believed in transparency, in showing the community that police officers were human beings who loved and sacrificed and hurt." She set down the coffee cup with shaking hands. What if? What if this story could help other families, other kids who lost their parents in the line of duty? Marcus, who had been coordinating with his supervisor via text, looked up. "Mrs. Mitchell, you don't owe anyone your grief. You don't have to perform your healing for cameras." "I know," Sarah said, and for the first time since James's death, her voice carried a note of strength that surprised even her. "But Emma has been telling me for 8 months that she remembered things no one believed she could remember. She's been carrying this alone because the therapists and the grief counselors, and even I told her she was too young, that her memories were just dreams or wishes." She stood and walked to the window, watching her daughter laugh as Ranger's tail thumped against the grass. "If our story helps one other child feel less alone, less crazy, less like they're making things up, then maybe James's death can mean something beyond just loss." Pete's eyes filled with tears. "James would be proud of you, Sarah. You know that, right? He'd be so damn proud." Within an hour, Sarah had agreed to a single interview with a local news station, with one condition. The focus had to be on the bond between K-9 officers and their families, on the legacy these dogs carried, and on the importance of supporting law enforcement families after tragedy. The reporter, a young woman named Michelle Torres who had lost her own father in Iraq, agreed immediately. By 3 o'clock, Pete's backyard had become an impromptu gathering place. Officer Stevens, the colleague James had saved by pushing him out of the line of fire, arrived with his wife and 2 teenage daughters. When Stevens saw Ranger, he broke down completely, dropping to his knees as the old dog walked over and pressed against him. "I'm alive because of James," Stevens sobbed, his arms around Ranger. "I'm here with my girls because he didn't hesitate." He looked at Sarah with red-rimmed eyes. "I've wanted to tell you that every day for 8 months, but I didn't know how. How do you thank someone for their husband's sacrifice?" Sarah knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You live, Michael. You love your daughters. You do your job with honor. That's how you thank him." Emma, watching the adults with serious eyes, walked over and patted Officer Stevens on the head the way she'd seen people comfort Ranger. "It's okay to be sad," she said in her high, clear voice. "Daddy would want you to be alive. He was a protector. That's what protectors do." More officers arrived, some from Riverside County, some from Marcus's department, even a few from neighboring jurisdictions who had worked joint operations with James. They brought food, stories, and tears. Pete's modest home couldn't contain them all, so they spilled into the yard, forming small clusters of blue uniforms and civilian clothes, united by respect for a fallen brother. Linda Hayes, the sergeant who had first connected Marcus with Pete, arrived carrying a large box. "Sarah, I don't know if you know this, but James was working on something before he died." She set the box on Pete's patio table. He was documenting the K9 breeding program, creating a database of every dog's lineage, every successful pairing, every puppy's placement. He wanted to prove that these dogs were more than just tools. They were legacy, family, continuity. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside were notebooks, flash drives, photographs, and a leather-bound journal with James's handwriting on the cover. "The next generation, building tomorrow's heroes." "He has entries about Ranger's breedings," Linda continued, pulling out a specific notebook. "Look, here's the entry about Atlas's litter. May 15, 2022, he wrote, 'Ranger sired 5 pups today, all healthy, all strong. I held the smallest one, the male with the white chest patch, and I swear he looked right into my soul. This one's going to be special. This one's going to protect someone's family the way Ranger protects mine.'" Marcus felt his chest tight as he realized James had held Atlas as a newborn puppy, had recognized his potential, had perhaps somehow known that this particular dog would one day comfort his daughter. The evening news interview was conducted in Pete's backyard with Emma sitting between Sarah and Ranger, Atlas lying at Marcus's feet. Michelle Torres asked gentle questions, and Emma answered with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. "I knew it was my daddy's dog because my heart knew," Emma explained, her hand buried in Ranger's fur. "Hearts don't forget people they love, and Ranger's heart still loves my daddy. I can feel it." When asked what she wanted people to know, Emma looked directly at the camera with those solemn blue eyes. "If you miss someone, it's okay. And if you remember them even when other people say you're too little to remember, you're not making it up. Love is real, and dogs know about love better than anybody." The segment ended with footage of Emma hugging Ranger while Atlas watched. 3 generations of love and loss and legacy intertwined in a single frame. By the time it aired at 6 o'clock, Sarah's phone had been restored to service, and it immediately exploded with messages. Fellow police widows reached out, sharing their own stories. Parents of young children who had lost officers thanked Sarah for validating their kids' memories and emotions. K9 handlers from across the country sent photos of their dogs, their fallen partners, their continuing bonds. But it was a message from the Riverside County Sheriff himself that made Sarah cry all over again. Detective Mitchell's personnel file contains a request he made shortly before his death. He asked that if anything happened to him, Ranger should go to a good home where he could rest and heal. He specifically wrote, "Ranger has given everything to this job. He deserves peace." Pete gave him that peace, Sarah, and now you've given him purpose again. James would be honored. As darkness fell and visitors began to leave, Emma refused to go. She'd fallen asleep against Ranger's side, her small body rising and falling with the dog's breathing. Atlas had curled up on her other side, creating a protective cocoon around the sleeping child. "We can carry her to the car," Marcus offered quietly. But Sarah shook her head, sitting down on the grass beside her daughter. "Not yet. Let her have this. Let them all have this." And so they sat together as stars emerged overhead. A widow, 2 K-9 officers, and 2 dogs who carried the legacy of a fallen hero, surrounded by the invisible but unbreakable bonds of a community united by service, sacrifice, and love. 2 weeks after that first meeting, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. She sat at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at the empty chair across from her where James used to sit with his morning coffee. The house felt too quiet, too empty, too full of ghosts. Emma's bedroom was down the hall, and Sarah could hear her daughter talking in her sleep, something she'd done every night since visiting Ranger. "Tell Daddy's dog I'll come back soon," Emma murmured in her dreams. "Tell him I didn't forget." Sarah picked up her phone and typed a text to Pete Dawson before she could second-guess herself. "Is your offer still open?" The response came within minutes despite the late hour. "Which offer? I made you several." Sarah smiled through her tears. Over the past 2 weeks, Pete had become an unexpected lifeline. He'd called every evening to tell Emma goodnight and let her talk to Ranger over speakerphone. He'd shared stories about James that Sarah had never heard, funny moments, proud moments, human moments that reminded her that her husband had been more than just a hero. He'd been a man who laughed and joked and sometimes sang off-key in the locker room. Pete had offered many things: his continued friendship, his support, his belief that Sarah and Emma were stronger than they knew. But there was one offer he'd made that Sarah had been too afraid to accept. Until now. "The one about Ranger," Sarah typed. "About him coming home with us." The phone rang immediately. Pete's gruff voice was thick with emotion. "Are you sure? Sarah, I love having Ranger here, but I always knew he wasn't really mine. He's been waiting for his family. He's been waiting for you." "Emma needs him," Sarah whispered. "And I think I need him too. We have James's old house, the yard where he and Ranger used to train. There are still toys in the garage that Ranger used to play with. Maybe it's time to bring him home." "When?" Pete asked simply. "Saturday. Give me a week to prepare Emma, to get the house ready too." "Sarah," Pete interrupted gently. "The house is already ready. It's been waiting just like Ranger has, just like you have. Come Saturday, come bring him home." The week passed in a flurry of activity. Sarah cleaned out the garage, finding Ranger's old toys, his training equipment, and a box she'd forgotten existed. Inside were photos of James and Ranger, at graduation from the K-9 Academy, at community events, at the station on Christmas when someone had put reindeer antlers on Ranger's head. There was also a letter, sealed in an envelope with Sarah's name written in James's distinctive handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I won't be there to watch Emma grow up, to grow old with you, to keep the promises I made on our wedding day. But I need you to know something important. Ranger will grieve for me. He'll grieve hard, the way dogs do when they lose their person. Please, if you can, take care of him. He's more than a partner, he's family. And he'll protect you and Emma the way he protected me. He'll love you the way I love you. Give him a chance to heal, and he'll help you heal too. All my love, forever and always, James." Sarah clutched the letter to her chest and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that she'd been holding back for 8 months. When Emma found her 20 minutes later, the little girl climbed into her lap without a word and held her mother the way Sarah had held her so many times before. "Daddy wants us to take care of Ranger," Sarah finally managed to say. Emma nodded solemnly. "I know, Mommy, Ranger told me." Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air. Marcus had offered to drive them again, but Sarah declined. "I need to do this myself," she'd said. "I need to bring him home the way James would have wanted." When they pulled into Pete's driveway, Ranger was already sitting on the porch, a packed bag beside him containing his food bowls, his favorite blanket, and his service medals that Pete had kept in a shadow box. The old dog's ears perked up at the sound of Sarah's car, and his tail began its now familiar rhythm of hope and recognition. Emma was out of the car before Sarah had fully stopped, racing toward Ranger with her arms outstretched. "We're taking you home," she shouted. "To Daddy's house, to your real home." Ranger stood, his entire body quivering with an emotion that looked suspiciously like joy. Pete descended the porch steps, his eyes red but his smile genuine. "He's been sitting there since dawn," Pete said as Sarah approached. "Like he knew, like he's been waiting for this day since James died." Sarah knelt in front of Ranger, taking his graying face between her hands. "I'm sorry it took so long," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't come for you sooner, but we're here now and we're taking you home. James wanted this. He wanted us to be a family." Ranger's response was to lean forward and lick the tears from her cheeks, a gesture so tender and deliberate that Sarah understood this dog had been grieving just as deeply as she had been lost just as completely, had been waiting just as desperately for someone to tell him it was okay to love again. The drive home was quiet. Emma sat in the backseat with Ranger's head resting on her lap, stroking his fur and singing the lullabies James used to sing. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror every few minutes, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing at the sight. When they pulled into the driveway of the house Sarah and James had bought 3 years ago, the house where they'd planned to raise Emma, to grow old together, to build a life, Ranger went completely still. His nose lifted, scenting the air, and a low whine emerged from his throat. "He remembers," Sarah said, her voice catching. "Pete, he remembers." Pete, who had followed in his own truck with Atlas and Marcus, nodded. This was his home for 5 years, Sarah. He trained in that yard, slept on that porch, said goodbye to James from that driveway every single morning. Sarah opened the car door, and Ranger stepped out slowly, carefully, as if afraid this might be a dream. He walked across the lawn to the front porch, his nose tracking along the steps where James had sat to put on his boots every morning. He moved to the side yard, to the patch of grass where they'd practiced commands, where Emma had taken her first steps while James cheered and Ranger barked encouragement. Then Ranger did something that made everyone present hold their breath. He walked to the garden beside the porch, to the spot where Sarah had planted a young oak tree in James's memory, and lay down beneath its small branches. He rested his head on his paws and released a long, shuddering sigh that sounded like relief, like grief, like coming home after the longest journey imaginable. Emma crawled out of the car and walked over to Ranger, lying down beside him on the grass, her small body pressed against his larger one. "We're home now," she told him. "All of us are home." Atlas approached quietly, supervised by Marcus, and lay down on Ranger's other side, son beside father, legacy beside legend. Sarah sat down in the grass too, followed by Pete, and then Marcus, all of them forming a circle around the old K9 who had given everything to his job, his partner, and his family. "Welcome home, Ranger," Sarah whispered. "Welcome home." And as the autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, warming them all, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt since the day James died. The possibility of peace, the promise of healing, and the unshakable knowledge that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in the universe. Even death couldn't break it. Especially not death. 6 months had passed since Ranger came home, and the Mitchell house had transformed from a mausoleum of grief into something that resembled a home again. Sarah stood at the kitchen window on a bright spring morning, watching Emma play in the backyard with Ranger. The old dog moved slower now, his arthritis more pronounced in the cooler mornings, but his eyes sparkled with contentment as Emma threw a tennis ball for him in gentle underhand tosses. "Not too far, Ranger," Emma instructed seriously, her voice carrying through the open window. "Remember what the vet said. You have to take it easy because you're a senior citizen now." Sarah smiled, remembering how Emma had sat in on Ranger's last veterinary appointment, asking questions about every medication, every recommendation, every treatment option with the fierce protectiveness of someone guarding their most precious treasure. The vet, Dr. Patricia Chen, Marcus's sister, as it turned out, had been moved to tears by the little girl's devotion. The house phone rang, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. It was Marcus. "Morning, Sarah. Just confirming you're still good for today." Emma's speech at the memorial. Sarah's stomach fluttered with nervous butterflies, not for herself, but for her daughter. Today was the dedication of the new K-9 Memorial Garden at the County Public Safety Building, and Emma had asked to speak. At 3.5 years old, she wanted to honor her father in front of hundreds of law enforcement officers, community members, and media outlets. "We're ready," Sarah said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Ranger's coming too," Emma insists. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Marcus replied warmly. "Atlas has been packing all morning like he knows it's a big day." The memorial dedication began at 11 o'clock. The public safety building's grounds had been transformed with a beautiful garden featuring a bronze statue of a K-9 officer and his dog, surrounded by plaques bearing the names of fallen officers and their K-9 partners. James Mitchell's name was there, with Ranger's name beside it, along with the date of his ultimate sacrifice. Sarah stood near the front of the gathered crowd, holding Emma's hand. Ranger sat on Emma's other side, wearing a ceremonial collar that Pete had saved from his working days. Atlas sat beside Marcus in the first row of officers, and Sarah noticed how the young dog kept glancing at his father, as if drawing strength from the old veteran's calm presence. The county sheriff spoke first, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Today we honor not just the officers who gave their lives, but the four-legged partners who stood beside them. These K-9s don't understand medals or recognition. They understand loyalty, duty, and love. They protect not for glory, but because it's in their very DNA to serve." Several officers spoke, sharing stories of their K-9 partners. Pete Dawson's voice cracked as he talked about Ranger's career, about his unwavering dedication, about the night he subdued a suspect while his own heart was breaking. "Ranger didn't just lose his partner that night," Pete said. "He lost his best friend, his purpose, his world. But this amazing little girl and her mother gave him a new purpose, to protect them the way he couldn't protect James." Then it was Emma's turn. Sarah's heart hammered as her daughter stood, smoothing down her navy blue dress, the same color as her father's uniform. Ranger rose with her, refusing to leave her side, and Sarah decided not to fight it. If Emma needed her father's dog beside her for courage, then that's exactly where Ranger should be. Marcus knelt down, holding a microphone at Emma's level. The crowd of nearly 500 people fell silent, waiting. Emma looked out at all those faces, police officers in dress uniforms, families who had lost their own heroes, community members who had followed her story, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might freeze. But then Emma placed her small hand on Ranger's head, took a deep breath, and began to speak in her clear, high voice. "My name is Emma Mitchell, and my daddy was a hero. His name was James, and he had a dog named Ranger who was a hero too." She paused, looking down at Ranger, who gazed up at her with absolute devotion. "When my daddy died, everybody told me I was too little to remember him. They said I was too young to understand, but I did remember. I remembered his voice and his hugs and the way he smelled like coffee in the morning, and I remembered his dog." The crowd was absolutely silent. Sarah could see officers wiping their eyes, families clutching each other. "Then one day I saw Atlas and I knew he was special. I knew he was connected to my daddy somehow, and I was right." Emma's voice grew stronger. "Atlas is Ranger's son, which means my daddy helped make him, My daddy's work made Atlas possible, and Atlas helps Officer Marcus protect people every single day. That means my daddy is still protecting people, even though he's in heaven." Several people openly sobbed. Marcus had to look away, his jaw clenched with emotion. "I want to tell all the kids who lost their mommies or daddies who were police officers, it's okay to remember. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to miss them forever." Emma's voice wavered but didn't break. "And I want to tell the police dogs, thank you for taking care of our parents. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for protecting people even when it's scary." She knelt down, wrapping her arms around Ranger's neck. "Ranger still misses my daddy every day. I can tell because sometimes he looks at daddy's picture and his tail stops wagging. But he also loves me and my mommy, and we love him. Love doesn't run out. There's always enough love." Emma stood back up, and with a wisdom far beyond her years, she looked directly into the news cameras. "My daddy used to say that heroes aren't people who don't get scared. Heroes are people who get scared but do the right thing anyway. Ranger was scared the night my daddy died, but he still caught the bad guy. That makes him a hero too." She turned to the bronze statue, walked over to it, and placed a single white rose at its base. "I love you, Daddy, and I promise I'll take care of your dog until we see you again." The silence that followed was sacred. Then, slowly, one officer began to clap. Then another. Then the entire crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Ranger stood beside Emma, his tail wagging slowly, his head held high as if he understood the magnitude of what this little girl had just done. After the ceremony, as people gathered for refreshments and to visit the memorial plaques, something remarkable happened. Officers began approaching Sarah, not just from their county, but from agencies across the state. They wanted to contribute to the James Mitchell K-9 Legacy Fund that Sarah had established. What had started as a small scholarship fund had grown into something much larger. "We've raised over $200,000, Sarah told Pete that evening as they sat on her porch watching Emma play with both Ranger and Atlas in the yard. James would be stunned. "James would be proud," Pete corrected. "The fund is already helping 3 retired K-9s get medical care they desperately needed. It's sponsoring 2 new K-9s for departments that couldn't afford them. And it's providing college scholarships for children of fallen K-9 officers. Sarah, you've created something extraordinary." Sarah watched as Emma giggled, wedged between the 2 German shepherds on the grass. Atlas had become a regular visitor, Marcus bringing him by twice a week for what they jokingly called father-son time. The 2 dogs would play gently with Emma, and Ranger seemed to grow younger in those moments, as if his son's energy was contagious. "Emma starts preschool in the fall," Sarah said softly. "She wants to do show and tell about police dogs. She's already planning what she'll say." Pete chuckled. "Of course she does. That girl has her father's heart and her mother's strength. She's going to change the world, Sarah. Just watch." That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, Ranger assumed his usual position on the floor beside her. Emma leaned over to kiss the old dog's head. "Good night, Ranger. Tell Daddy I made him proud today, okay?" Ranger's tail thumped against the floor, once, twice, 3 times. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair from Emma's forehead. "You were so brave today, baby. So brave and so strong and so beautiful." "Mommy," Emma's voice was sleepy, her eyes already drooping. "Do you think Daddy knows about Atlas? Do you think he knows his dogs are still helping people?" Sarah's throat tightened, but she managed to smile. "I think Daddy knows everything, sweetheart. And I think he's smiling right now, watching his daughter be brave, watching his dog have a loving home, watching his legacy grow stronger every single day." "Good," Emma murmured, her eyes closing, "because I'm going to keep making him proud, forever and ever." As Sarah turned off the light and tiptoed from the room, she paused at the doorway, looking back at her daughter curled up with Ranger's head resting against the bed. Atlas had fallen asleep in the hallway, as if standing guard. 2 generations of K-9 heroes, protecting the daughter of a fallen officer. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Emma was incredible today. James would be so proud. We all are. Another text came from Pete. Thank you for letting me be part of this journey. Thank you for bringing Ranger home. Thank you for showing me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sarah walked downstairs to the living room to the photo of James in his dress uniform that hung above the fireplace. She touched the frame gently. "We're okay," she whispered to the photograph. "Your girls are okay. Your dog is okay. And your legacy, James, your legacy is beautiful." Emma made sure everyone knows that heroes aren't defined by how they die, but by how they lived and who they loved. Outside, the spring evening was giving way to night. Stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. And somewhere, in the space between memory and hope, between grief and healing, between loss and love, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in almost a year. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. The knowledge that love endures, that legacy matters, that a 3-year-old girl's recognition of her father's dog had set in motion a ripple of healing that would touch countless lives. James Mitchell had been a hero in life. But his daughter, his wife, and his dog were ensuring that he remained a hero in death, not just in memory, but in action, in service, in the continuing mission to protect and serve that would outlive them all. And that, Sarah realized as she turned off the downstairs lights and headed to bed, was the greatest tribute of all. The end.